All right, welcome everyone to ASRG World Webinars, bringing you the latest in automotive research, innovation, and education. My name is John Heldreth, founder of the Automotive Security Research Group, and we have really a nice presentation for you guys tonight. We've changed the format a little bit, so if you're interested to learn more about ASRG, please find the introduction to ASRG on our YouTube channel. You can go to our website, www.asrg.io, or contact us directly over email at hello@asrg.io. So, before we get into the presentation, I just want to remind everybody we have really a lot of cool upcoming webinars in September. So next week, actually, we don't have anything planned. We do have an open spot. So if you guys are interested or you have some research you want to present or a topic that you want to discuss and some material, please let us know. Send us an email at hello@asrg.io. and we can discuss what makes sense. On September 17th, we have vehicle system forensics. The Harper Shaw investigation consultants did a case study, and their little system is called Frankie. We're going to have Noel in the house. He's going to talk about what they did, what's going on, and the results. September 24th, we have AI-based security and safety anomaly detection. So we're going to be talking about how to detect using AI, the challenges that it might involve. ATI is going to present that, Mustafa from ATI. So October 1st, I can't say what the title is yet. It might involve an OEM, it might not, but probably so. Anyways, we have a really great talk planned for October 1st. We're just waiting for the confirmation and the title. So lots of cool webinars coming to ASRG. Come back, join the YouTube channel, join ASRG, your local chapter, get involved, be a part of the solution, make a contribution to ASRG in the industry. Get in touch with us. I've added in the description links to different communication channels that we do have. Slack, Telegram, and so on, Twitter, whatever. We have everything. So come check us out. Be a part of the movement. So, all right. Enough of me, right? We have a great presentation. We have Adam Shostack here. He's going to be talking a little bit about threat modeling. And not only just threat modeling in general, but what's changing? What's coming up in 2020? Or what did come up in 2020? What new challenges are we facing? It's a completely different environment now. It's a completely different playing field. So, well, I'm not going to talk too much about it because then I give away everything. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Adam Shostack.
Threat modeling is how we get systematic about bringing security into our products by design. Hi, I'm Adam Shostack. I'm an expert in threat modeling, and today I want to share with you some of my thoughts about how this practice is changing in 2020. Let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. So, I wrote a book on threat modeling, created some of the first software to help people threat model, created a card game, Elevation of Privilege, to teach threat modeling. Earlier in my career, I helped to create the CVE. I'm on the review board at BlackHat, and these days I run a consultancy which helps organizations deliver better, more secure products. So when people ask me, what's changing in threat modeling? I see threat modeling as a way of thinking about the world. And so when they ask what's changing in threat modeling, I ask what's changing in the world. Obviously, in 2020, we're living with a global pandemic, which is having tragic impacts on a great many people in many, many ways. And on the cyber front, we're seeing an expansion of espionage, countries breaking into one another's research labs to steal data. We're seeing a fight between the President of the United States and TikTok, a Chinese media company. We saw a set of vulnerabilities called Ripple 20. And Ripple 20 are vulnerabilities in libraries that are used in Internet of Things. The rise of international relations, where the president is having a fight with a Chinese media company, the importance of supply chain. We'll come back to these supply chain related issues. We've seen privacy become a major stumbling block to contact tracing apps. And as someone who's worked in privacy for 20 years, I'm very surprised to see privacy rise to this level, although it's not the sole factor that's causing this tension. We've seen the Food and Drug Administration award millions of dollars to develop threat modeling for medical devices. We've seen a case of a fake Twitter account receive national news. We've seen the CSO of Uber be charged with obstruction of justice for covering up a data breach. And so the world is changing, and many of these changes impact the way we think about threat modeling. So first, I want to talk about what the pandemic means for development overall. There's a number of key drivers of change that are happening. The first is that everyone is scared, stressed, and sick. This includes your customers, it includes your prospects, it includes your employees who are doing the development. Many of these folks are grieving for losses. They're caring for children in a different way. They're worried about elderly parents in a new way. And so people like to say we're working from home. I don't believe it. I believe we're sheltering from a global disaster and trying to get as much work done as we can as we do it. This means our teams are stressed. They're also distributed. And so the informal communication that used to happen at the water cooler is no longer happening in the same way. And this causes real changes to how we develop our products. And so development teams need more communications tools. They need specific frameworks that help them work in this world. They need assurance about what they're doing is the right thing now, and they need reassurance that they're doing it in the right ways. And all this is happening as security features become more important, security properties become more important. And this impacts on your development and drives a need for more or better threat modeling. This is the sort of threat we had to manage in 2019. This is a highly skilled attacker attacking an IoT cat door.
Oh my god, he did it.
2019 was a simpler time. I miss it. And in 2019, I advocated for 4 questions being at the heart of threat modeling. What are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? And I think of these questions as my North Stars. When I'm not sure how to threat model something new, complex, I go back to these questions. And there are tools that we can use for each of them. Data flow diagrams help us express what we're working on. Techniques like Stride and the Killchain help us address what can go wrong. Even with all the strangeness of 2020, these questions still work well. They help us organize our thinking around threat modeling, and what's more, they're going to help us organize our thinking around this talk. So I'm going to start with the question of what are we working on, and also how are we working on it a little bit. In that, I'll talk about the fast-moving world of cyber. I'm going to skip over for this talk the agile world. I'm going to talk about models being a little scary and sometimes difficult to work with. Then we'll move to what can go wrong. Talk mainly about Stride, machine learning, a few other things there. With that, let's turn our attention to the fast-moving world of cyber. And this is something people say all the time. Attacks are changing, TTPs are changing, everything's changing all the time. And you know, I find that with good models, they help me see that things are changing a little less quickly than some people seem to believe. And so, if we go back to the Morris worm, the first big internet worm in 1988, over 30 years ago, we can see that there are some substantial similarities. The Morris worm used a couple of techniques to spread. It used stack smashing, it used common password lists, and it took advantage of misconfigured daemons. And you know, we still have vulnerabilities to stack smashing in common IoT devices. We still have lists of common passwords being used. Misconfigured daemons, less so today. But it's important to remember that things are not always moving as fast when we have models to help us understand how they're changing. So, in the world of IoT, there are absolutely more sensors, more actuators. These are things that look like cars. They look like door-opening dogs. Yeah, literally. Weird, huh? But a lot of these things run Linux like it's 1999. It's amazing. The cost of these devices is all over the map, literally going from light bulbs to jet engines. The impact of a problem in one of these IoT devices is also all over the map. You might have an IoT water sensor that tells you if there's a leak. And if it's out of commission for a month and there's no leak, who cares? You might have a medical device where you care very deeply that it's out of commission for even a few minutes. And we've got some new attackers, like cats and spies. And the ways in which we threat model are evolving and responding in response to this. There's more tools. I created a version of the Microsoft Threat Modeling Tool. It's very much an integrated development environment concept. There's a company in England pioneering a discrete approach. It's threat models as a service. You upload a drawing, it returns a spreadsheet. Neat. Arius Risk is focused on enterprise scale threat modeling. And so there's all of these different tools that are available. There's new approaches like Stride is not new, like using the Killchain for threat modeling the operational systems that we're working on. And we're thinking about deliverables in all sorts of new ways. A decade ago, we thought about threat model documents. Now we think about filing bugs. We think about backlogs. And the building block framework of thinking about how we compose methodologies out of these little tools helps us contextualize change and manage what is otherwise a very fast-moving world of cyber.
And jumping ahead just a little bit here.
So let's turn our attention now to the idea of models. And Ivo Galperin of the Electronic Frontier Foundation asked, is this term intimidating? And I think she's on to something. And I really want to be respectful of the concern that she's raising. We should make threat modeling easier. I believe that. Created a game to make it easier for people to pick up and learn. So in this, I'm entirely with her. And I also want to remember that people model all the time and that some things are more difficult than others. And we have to find models that are as simple as possible, but no simpler. And so In this world of automated code generation, models require thought. Those thoughts might be wrong. And quality requires judgment, not just saying it compiles. And so, setting aside the joking, models are scary. People don't necessarily enjoy doing this work because they might be wrong. It's hard to check the models, and so people want to automate all of this away. And I think that's a natural and reasonable desire. But as long as we have software developers who are writing new code, we're going to need threat modeling to be done in a way that helps us understand the impacts of this new code. And that's not to say that we can't use machines to help us think. It's to say that we can't trust the machines to do all the thinking for us. And so I like to actually do a little exercise. I'd like you to pause and think about this next slide for a second before I say anything. And the question is, I'm going to show you two models. I want you to think about which one is better. Now, some people say the Lego model is better. It's got parts that come apart. It's fun to put together. You can build it into other things. Some people say the Hot Wheels version is better, that it's more true to life, it's higher fidelity, it's die-cast so it doesn't fall apart. The answer really is neither model is better. What's better is what you're using the model for. That determines which one is more appropriate to that use case. And so George Box, a British statistician, liked to say that all models are wrong and some models are useful. What he meant by this is the act of creating a model means that we're eliminating detail. So the model can't be right. The test of a model is not, is this model right? No, I can tell you that right now. I don't even need to look at it. The fact that you've told me it's a model tells me it's wrong. All models are wrong. The test of a model is it useful? And that's the way I think about threat modeling is, does this tool, does this approach help us get to a better result? Now, as we think about getting to a better result, I want to distinguish a little bit, and this is a lesson that I've learned over the last few years. I want to distinguish between the idea of dialogue and discussion. And I learned this from John Alspaugh, who used to be the CTO at Etsy. And he talks about two modes of engineering. One mode is where we're having a dialogue. Think about a Socratic dialogue where people are having a conversation trying to help one another discover the truth. And in engineering, we do this when we say, what if? We say, how about? We prototype things. Later in the process, we commit to one idea. We build production quality code. The answers are now fixed. And we can think about this in relation to how we threat model. So different models that we have serve different goals. When the words we use are in Slack, in email, when our diagrams are on the whiteboard, we're in a dialogue form. And this is really powerful as a way to threat model early, to figure out between choices which one makes sense. As time goes on, as we resolve from dialogue into discussion, we write specifications, we draw diagrams in Visio. Then those diagrams, those documents, those specifications get reviewed. And so there's a failure mode that often happens, which is someone says, oh, we need to do a threat model review. Bring me a document, bring me a diagram. Two failures right there. The first is thinking of threat modeling as a review rather than a dialogue. The second is to say, bring me a diagram. When you say bring me a diagram, you shift over towards that review and you shift over towards the review and use side of the picture. And in doing so, you avoid the possibility of having a dialogue. But oftentimes, a security team will show up wanting to have a dialogue, having said, bring me a diagram. The team works hard to get the diagram right to reflect what they're planning to build, and the security team shows up looking to have a dialogue about choices, not realizing that they've cut off that possibility. And so, again, these different goals have different deliverables associated with them. The last thing I'll say is, if you're not clear about what stage you're doing your threat modeling at, you're generating extra work for yourself. So give some thought to when the threat modeling is being done, how you'd like it to go, and that influences the engagement model. Lastly, a lot of threat modeling processes implicitly end up looking like this. It's not where you want to be. Let's turn our attention to the question of what can go wrong, the ways in which we think about the threats. And it's important to frame this always as thinking not about threats, but thinking about what can go wrong with a given system. And so we're going to cover supply chain. We're going to talk about stride, adversarial machine learning, using the kill chain as a way to anticipate what can go wrong. And we're going to talk about conflict that happens through technological systems and impacts them. Let's think about supply chain. And there's a couple of pieces that we want to think about in terms of the supply chain. There's the growing importance of national origin. There are vulnerabilities in the supply chain. There are regulatory demands for attention to the security of devices you're building. Let's take each in turn. The conflict between Donald Trump and TikTok is focused not on the behavior of TikTok's app, which frankly is unfortunately not all that unusual, but is focused on where TikTok is headquartered. And by legitimizing such complaints and arguing that TikTok needs to be sold to controlling interests outside of China, we're going to see this play out in more and more software supply chains, where the origin of your software is going to become important. It's not just the origin. Ripple 20, a set of vulnerabilities in IoT toolkits, is going to increase the importance of understanding where your software is from, who created it, and your ability to manage those vulnerabilities. Lastly, this year, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States has awarded nearly $3 million to one of its suppliers to focus in on how we do what's called pre-market security. Threat modeling is key to that. And the FDA's attention right now is focused on medical device manufacturers. The FDA is talking to the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, and presumably they're talking to other regulatory bodies, and other regulatory bodies they're not talking to are paying attention. And so we're probably going to see an increase in regulatory demands to understand your threat modeling process, and potentially even to see your threat models, depending on what sort of industry you're in. Now, you need to pay attention to vulnerabilities. This means you need to be able to compile, deliver, and install updates, and you potentially need to be able to do this for quite a long time. Manufacturers of durable goods are really going to see an increase in demands for software updates through the normal life cycle of those goods, which, for example, in the case of auto manufacturers, might be 10, 20 years or longer. And so understanding your supply chain and the changes happening are important to you. With that, let's turn our attention to Stride. And Stride is now 21 years old. The original paper was in 1999. Some people say that it's getting long in the tooth. Some people say it's old enough to drink. I say it's a proven and effective methodology that we can keep using and deploying because it stood the test of time. It's still a helpful mnemonic if you're not familiar with it. STRIDE stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. And it's a way of thinking about what can go wrong across a wide range of system types. And what's new in 2020 is new details for the various threats. I'll also talk at the end about STRIDE Lateral Movement, which is an extension that I'm not a big fan of, but some people find helpful. So, in spoofing, lots of changes in spoofing. There's phone authentication, there's a market for selfies, there's audio and video spoofing, and there's GPS spoofing. Let's walk through each. So, there's a lot of authentication systems that people are using text messages or phone calls as a way to transfer information. And SMS has been deprecated by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology in the United States. They recommend moving away from it. There's a set of phone porting and SIM porting attacks, and to be frank, I wrote about these in my book in 2014. I don't believe that the phone companies are up to being a key link in our defenses, and they're not stepping up in the way I think would be appropriate. Lastly, there's what we call scammery. Legitimate businesses imitating scammers and doing things that make it impossible for normal human beings to understand whether or not they're getting contacted by a legitimate business or by a scammer. We make it impossible for them to form robust mental models. We make it impossible for people to defend themselves. And a lot of this happens when, for example, your bank calls you up and says, I need to authenticate you. Great. First, let me authenticate you. How do I know that you're my legitimate bank? No, we need to authenticate you. That's exactly the behavior that a scammer engages in, and it's also behavior, unfortunately, that legitimate companies engage in, and we need to stop. So, spoofing of facial recognition. In 2016, MasterCard announced a process called Identity Check, publicly described as pay with a selfie. And in 2018, 6gil, an Israeli cyber intelligence firm, reported selfies being included in dark web information for sale. There's also this amazing little baseball cap which which projects information on a face, confuses facial recognition systems. Sort of neat if you don't want to be recognized. Spoofing of audio is growing. There's voice cloning as a service, and voice cloning exists. There's all these startups, open source projects. Wouldn't it be nifty if we could put Grandpa's voice in a teddy bear? Nifty or slightly creepy? I'm not sure, but what's important is not my perspective on this as much as there's a market that is developing. The tools are going to get better and better and better. It's being used for both formal authentication, my voice is my password, verify me, and background authentication. When I call my bank now, they simply use my voice to determine whether or not I'm me. And so when you start to think about this and you start to integrate it with things like Google Duplex, we're going to see a rise in phishing where the phishing attack uses your boss's voice to make it seem more real. This is really scary. We're going to see attacks on spouses. Hey honey, real quick, what's the Netflix password? I'm just trying to watch my video. And this scenario, to be frank, made a little bit more sense pre-COVID, but post-COVID it will also make sense. And look, if you live in a big house, don't tell me you haven't texted a family member rather than walking over there. Come on, we all know it's okay. And it enables these phishing behaviors. It's a concern we're going to have to struggle with and work through. So spoofing of video is also something that's real. Deepfake video is out there and it is democratizing video fakery. And I have an example I want to share with you, but before I do, and this one's safe, but before I do, I want to tell you that if you search on deepfake video, you very quickly get to some really disturbing stuff that's not work safe. Be careful, be aware of what you're doing. With that,
the many ways to spoof a person in email feel intuitive to people who've been on the internet for a while. Faking people on websites can be fun, but we tend to believe our eyes and ears or their technological proxies, audio and video recording. There's an emerging field of technology called voice cloning. Companies are already using voice cloning to provide a consistent experience for customers who call their support lines. Imagine being able to bring grandparents to life in a teddy bear, or to not have to worry about the availability of a voiceover actor. There are lots of companies making voice cloning, and today, good voice analysis and reproduction can require an hour or more of source material. It's not just audio. Deepfake technology can be used to produce video of someone saying things they've never said.
so I want to say thank you to the team at LinkedIn Learning who produced this video. That's my producer, Ray. She's amazing, and she's helped put together many of the videos I do on LinkedIn Learning that are available. So, thanks, Ray. Lastly, there's spoofing of global positioning systems, and this is now commercially real. In Shanghai, there's weird stuff going on with GPS that's affecting commercial shipping. Let's turn our attention to tampering. Physical access is of increasing importance, and it's important with, for example, people renting their houses in Airbnb. It's important when we think about big durable things like cars. So cars are accessed not only by the owner, but they're accessed by the spouse, they're accessed by children, they're accessed by mechanics. Each of these people has potentially different and competing interests who might want the car to report different things via the odometer, via a black box. How fast were you driving? Oh, Dad, I was totally under the speed limit. And look, the OBD2 thing shows I was under the speed limit. Hey, the computer is always right. So we're going to see attacks based on physical access growing in importance. And sometimes, with my Raspberry Pi, that's totally cool. And sometimes it's problematic. Sometimes, with the OBD2 example, it might be outside the scope that I normally think about. Should my OBD3 port be producing signed data? What does it mean to produce signed data in real time? There's some engineering complexity we may want to start thinking about here. Moving on to repudiation, denying responsibility for something. It's an interesting set of attacks recently. They got a whole bunch of press. In fact, we received some at our household. Here in Washington State, it was seeds that showed up from China Post, marked earrings, for no apparent reason. And it turns out that when you look at this, it's not a matter of trade policy, it's people doing fake reviews. Or maybe it's people doing shipment fraud, but they're shipping a real package so that they can say, oh no, Amazon, Etsy, eBay, I did ship a package of earrings to Adam. Don't know why he's arguing. Look, here's the receipt from the Postal Service that shows I shipped a package weighing under a pound. It was really seeds, but now we're in a more complex argument where repudiation attacks matter, and we're probably going to see a commercialization of these services, if we haven't already, in producing either real receipts or doctored receipts to support a claim that items were shipped, delivered, signed for, etc. Information disclosure is a biggie in 2020. Location. There was a story a couple of years ago, still relevant, where some fitness tracking company was producing maps which happened to show where people were going running in, say, Afghanistan and Iraq, and disclosing information. A year later, there was another story, another fitness tracker. It's exactly the same problem, and 2 days later, the Department of Defense banned GPS-enabled fitness trackers for use by American troops. Now look, the best time to find security problems is while you're designing and developing the product. The second best time is when it's on the front page of the New York Times, and you can go to your CEO and say, "There but for the grace of God are we," and fix it before the DoD issues a ban. These issues of information, locational privacy, are coming into strong play with regards to pandemic response. The idea of knowing where people are, very powerful, very important. And so, a lot of this is driven by phones. Sensors are in everything. Excuse me. These sensors are in everything, and they're better than we ever expect. There's a barometer in your phone to help measure altitude. You can use the accelerometer because the surface of your phone is in fact a drum with a very taut surface, and tapping on it impacts the accelerometer. Microphones are being used. They listen deep into the ultrasound to track where you are again. And there was a case in Japan. A pop star was photographed in her apartment, and an obsessive person zoomed way in on the photo, saw a bus sign reflected in her pupil, used that information to kidnap her, and fortunately, she was physically okay and understandably deeply shaken by the experience. And if a pop star who's probably unfortunately used to dealing with stalkers wasn't aware that this was a potential risk, these things exceed our expectations in important ways. Denial of service attacks. Classically, these used to absorb compute, storage, and bandwidth. Today, they also absorb your cloud budget. They absorb battery. As we think about designing things in the Internet of Things, battery becomes more and more important as a feature to protect, as a resource to protect. Lastly, elevation of privilege. There have been a lot of isolation breaks, and the Spectre, Meltdown, Rowhammer family are getting smarter and smarter. We're going to see an ongoing set of these. It's not, well, there were unique incidents and unique points. There's absolutely going to be a stream that you need to plan for in your supply chain. There's also an issue where disentangling device control can be impossible. Between local accounts on a device, cloud accounts on a device, the use of these after breakups in incidents of intimate partner violence or control, really, really disturbing. There's a New York Times article on thermostats, locks and lights. It's important to think about who has access to these systems in what way, and in what ways a divorce, an adoption, even just the sale of a device. We need to be able to disentangle and reset, and simultaneously how that reset can be used to break someone's understanding that they have access to a device. Oops, I hit reset. You no longer have access to the locks. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Sometimes it's important to allow. Sometimes it's dangerous to allow. We need to think about these in our threat modeling work. So with that, STRIDE, spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service remains, and elevation of privilege, remains an important set of threats to think about. And I want to mention one more aspect of STRIDE, which is this addition of lateral movement. And some people are effectively threat modeling by adding lateral movement to STRIDE. And in my mind, isn't lateral movement just a subset of spoofing? That's the way I think about it. And, you know, some people want to add it in. Okay, maybe it's going to be annoying, maybe it's going to be helpful. And there's another issue that I have with this, which is really only Microsoft is going to fix lateral movement by really adding in more authentication options. And over the last few years, if you're running on the most modern Microsoft operating systems, they're doing an impressive job of engineering this in. And also, I want to be clear, these issues of authentication theft also apply to SSH keys. We often get really focused on pass the hash, as in a landman hash. It's not unique to Microsoft. And so overall, I don't love this, this lateral movement extension to STRIDE, but all models are wrong. Some models are useful. If this helps you threat model your systems better, don't stop using it because I'm saying I don't like it. Go ahead, use it if it works. So that's STRIDE, and with that, I'm going to move on because the threats evolve and STRIDE is one of many approaches. Threats evolve, and so does our understanding of ways to find them and to do so in a way which is structured, systematic, and comprehensive. And so as our technology evolves, there's ways to think about threats to machine learning. There's ways to use Killchains as a way to understand the state of the world. There's ways to use Killchains to predict what will go wrong. And we can see in the increasing use of social media, which we often think of as Twitter, Facebook, but TikTok, Instagram, Etsy, review fraud on Yelp, there's all sorts of conflict which occurs in the platforms which we are building, deploying, and making use of. So, machine learning systems, first off, are computer programs and systems which can be attacked in all the ways that other computer systems can be. Shocking, I know, but worth saying. Sometimes we sprinkle magic machine learning dust on things. But there's also machine learning, which is designed to break your systems or your machine learning systems. And so to bend your machine learning systems to the attacker's goals. And so there's a set of things around how we threat model machine learning and how we think about the problems overall. And this is evolving with work that's been done at Microsoft, at the Berryville Institute of Machine Learning, and if you're building machine learning systems, they are worth looking into in depth. So, Killchains. The use of Killchains in incident response has been around for a few years now and is gaining a lot of popularity, often but not exclusively using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And it's reasonable to think about how we can use these to think about what can go wrong before we've built a system. If you're not familiar with Killchains, there are steps such as weapon development, delivery, exploitation, persistence, and actions on objectives. And while we're building systems, we can use these to think about where would an attacker send the attack? How would it exploit things? What would it communicate with for command and control? And I'm seeing increased successful use of these techniques in service deployments, and I'm seeing increased successful use integrating security operations centers into threat modeling. I'm seeing a few organizations where the SOC has said you cannot go live until you give us a completed threat model, which they then use for incident response planning. And so the kill chain is becoming an important way to answer what can go wrong. MITRE ATT&CK is an important framework to think about. There's also the unifiedkillchain.com. This is a master's thesis that a fellow in the Netherlands wrote, in which he created a meta model of the various kill chain models and talked about the various strengths and weaknesses of different kill chain models for incident response use. And it's helpful to see how we can better think about kill chains as a tool in threat modeling. Even before the pandemic, increasing parts of our lives were being lived online, and with that came conflict. This is a screen capture from Yelp. And in it, they're talking about a business that was in the news, and people had been coming to post negative reviews based on those news stories. And what I want to draw your attention to is that this is an engineering choice that Yelp made in response to these attacks on the business. And there are choices here. For example, they explain that they are going to remove reviews rather than moderate them and not allow them to get onto the site. They tell you when they're going to start that process, so you can set a calendar invite. No, I don't think that's exactly their plan, but that's an effective choice that they've made. And so I've been thinking about this. I think it's an important part of the evolution of threats online. And there's more at a GitHub site that I'm working on with a few collaborators. Would love to have you involved. And so with that, I want to summarize the portion of this focused on what can go wrong. Talked a lot about Stride and how those instances are evolving and changing as the world changes, and how Stride remains a time-tested and effective way to answer the question, what can go wrong? Kill chains have taken their place next to Stride, and we can use them in tandem or individually to analyze a system. Both are useful models. Adversarial machine learning continues to evolve and is important if you are using machine learning systems as part of your security or as part of your product. Lastly, conflict looms, and we are not yet dealing with it as well as we need to. So some key takeaways for the talk overall. First, the fundamental skills of threat modeling remain important, valuable for bringing security to the products and services that you are developing. The details of what we're working on, how we're working on it, and the threats are all changing. And we need to change with them, but that doesn't mean we need to throw out everything we've learned. It means we need to evolve. And conflict modeling, again, is looming over all of us. It's a set of resources that I'm going to make available, but not really talk about. Some key takeaways for the talk overall. First, the fundamental skills of threat modeling that we've developed and learned to apply remain important as we get systematic, structured, and comprehensive in analyzing the security of the products and services that we're building. Some of the details are changing, and they're changing in important ways. We need to pay attention, and we need to find ways to bring the lessons that we have learned to the broader world as technology becomes more and more important in that broader world. There's some resources which I'm going to make available to you, and with that, thank you very much for your time and attention today.
You're welcome. Here's the real threat is our inability to video conference. Testing coming in. You're welcome. It's really a pleasure to join you all today. Well, thank you. You're welcome. So, so if you the almost everything you're going to read about kill chains is focused on using a kill chain in an incident response process. And so the thing I want to encourage you to do, and if you go to attack.miter.org, you'll see, and I'm just pulling the site up as I speak, you'll see across the top of the attack matrix for enterprise things like initial access and execution and persistence. And the reason I like to look at attack is because it gives us across the top those tactics and then the techniques that fit into them. And so if you're a top-down thinker, you can think about initial access, execution, persistence, etc. If you're a bottom-up thinker, just looking at the persistence column, you can think about attack manipulation, bits jobs, auto start execution, etc., and form a model from that. And the key to using kill chains effectively in threat modeling is to think about how can someone execute on one of these tactics against the vehicle you're building, against the cloud system you're building. What is the way they would do that? And we've seen some examples of this, for example, in the work done at UW, where they used the in-dash entertainment system as a way to get initial access. Hope that addresses the question. John, are you there? I seem to be in... Okay. If you want to readjust your audio to OBS and just type the questions, I can read them off as well. Gives real meaning to, please repeat the question. So the question is, are kill chains used along with stride? Is it either or? And the answer is really dependent on the project. Some will use one or the other. Some will use both as a way of getting multiple perspectives. And this is a little bit like doing both in FMEA and in STPA analysis. You may do both if you're thinking about the breaks. You may do only one if you're thinking about the headrest video monitors, because it may not matter as much. So where it matters more, or where you're trying to make sure that you really are being comprehensive in your analysis, using both is helpful, but you don't need to do it in every component. So how does attack address insider threats? And this is a little bit of comparing apples and oranges. The leading organizations that I work with have discovered that it's really hard for us to believe that John is going to do us wrong. And so what they do is they focus in on What happens if John falls victim to a phishing attack? His machine gets taken over, and then what can he do? And so, rather than focusing on the insider as an insider, we focus on the insider's account, their access and privileges, and we can use attack to say, if someone is going to be malicious, how would they, excuse me, how would they acquire additional credentials? And here I'm looking towards the middle of the set of tactics. How would they engage in lateral movement? How would they collect information? How would they exfiltrate it? And we're using the same set of techniques, but we've used this, the account has been taken over trick to avoid some of the emotionally complex discussions that happen because we trust John and we don't want to say he's going to do these wrong things, but we also want to defend our systems. And so we can use attack starting from the idea that someone already has initial access because they were granted it by the normal processes, and now it's being abused by an attacker. Great question. So I believe there. Oh, yes. Great question. How will these be used in the automotive industry? And I think there's a couple of key places. The first is cars are getting connected now to clouds. There are more and more computers in a standard vehicle, and we need to think about the way these components are going to be attacked, the impacts of those attacks, and our responses. The second frame is in connected vehicle to vehicle experiences where there's a lot of progress being made in the resources. There's a link to a recent work by the United Nations on internationalization and interoperability of these systems. We need to think about attacks on each of the connected vehicle components. The final area is in autonomous vehicles, and this is the one that everyone likes to go on about. I can confuse the sensors and make the autonomous vehicle behave badly. And those are exciting, media friendly attacks. And it's important as you are developing your autonomous vehicle strategies to also have a systematic, structured, and comprehensive approach to the security of your cyber components so that when, and I say when, not if, when these attacks happen, there's a story you can tell about what you're doing to make sure the vehicles that you're selling are safe. Because I really believe I've worked with some organizations doing work in autonomous driving, and I really believe that moving towards the level 5 capabilities where we're really relying on software to do the right things is going to save a lot of lives, is going to keep a lot of people out of the hospital. And we need to make sure that we've got a great story around our cybersecurity so that we can address the concerns people have and roll these out sooner. Thank you very much for joining our talk. Um, It was great to be here. If you have follow-up questions, please email me, adam@shostack.org, LinkedIn/Shostack. I'm really excited about the possibilities that threat modeling brings to our engineering, to what we're doing as researchers, as engineers. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And I'll also say thank you on behalf of John, who I know is laughing in the background, who I know is excited to have you all here today. So thank you.